People don't typically call me when they're doing great. I don't typically get phone calls from people when things are going well. In fact, you might be surprised when people actually call me. In fact, the only two people in here that I know, maybe more of you, the ones who would know what I get called for are my first responder, firefighter, EMT guys, and my law enforcement guys. That really, I get called for many of the same things. I'll just give you a kind of a breakdown to some of the things in my life. In fact, if I ever had the discipline to do so, I would write a book called Things I Never Knew I'd Do in Ministry, right? And just in no particular order, I've been the first call when a loved one passes, and I've helped the funeral director meet with them and go over insurance and do all that stuff. In fact, I've been called. In fact, one time, and I don't know if I have this in here, so if I say it twice, I apologize. In fact, when COVID was hitting and the funeral director, Mac and Liz, neither one could be there, I actually got to play the part of a funeral director for a whole weekend. Yeah, I put on my suit. I sat there, and I had my little mask on. I asked people to sign in, and I would say things like this. Look how good I am. Look at this. Which viewing are you here for today? That one's in the chapel. Thank you. Just make sure you sign the guest book. Thank you. No, and I did that, right? And then when it was all said and done, it's like 9 o'clock at night, and there's two separate viewings going on with two bodies, and I thought, I'm going to go look at the bodies. Don't do that. I'm in the passing along people business, but I haven't really went there, looked at somebody, and then went and looked at the other one. I thought, what am I doing? Right? It was kind of awkward, but I've been the funeral director. Things I've been called. I remember Michelle might remember this. I was called one time. It's about 9 o'clock at night because somebody's son came home drunk and was violent. And I went out Rowell Hill, and I had to go out there, and I met him coming down, and I had forgot on the way out there how huge this teenager was, right? But yeah, we had our conversation right there on the side of the road in gravel. I've had to do that. I've actually, I've been called and been there right with the first responders and suicides and dealt with them and asked when and they left, and I've cleaned up suicide scenes. People basically, they call me, the funeral director, we have an agreement that anytime that someone doesn't have a pastor, that they call me and I do the funeral for people if they're willing to do it. It's a privilege and an honor, but that's some of the things I do in this town. I've been called when a parent called me because a kid came home high. And this person was actually in law enforcement. He's like, I can't deal with my own kid. I want to kill this child. So I dealt with the kid, took him to our house, and discovered that my dog has a sensitivity to weed. That was fascinating to find out. So that was interesting, but I've been that guy. In fact, I guess what you would say is that the theme really is I get called when people need help. That's really what happens. I just get called when something is going wrong. And quite often, in many cases, for many of you in here, that's in the form of some counseling. Whether it's with you or whether it's with your children. I look around here and don't feel awkward if you go, I think he's talking about me. Of course I am. But there's multitudes of you in here. There's more than one that I get called for to help with counseling. Anger, depression, hurt, fear, everything that people go through. And really what we're talking about is when you call me or those of us like me, because there's an army of us out there, thank goodness, right? That really what's happened is in your life, an event has occurred, something has happened with you or your children or your family, and everything else in your life becomes peripheral and you can't even consider it, and all of your energy shrinks down to this pinpoint area on the map of your life. And you're thinking, I could care less about anything else. This is all I can think about. But it's actually typically not the issue they need help with. And I want you guys who've called someone, and maybe me, to think about this. It's not typically the issue that you need help with. It's the weight of the emotions involved. It's this idea that's paralyzing. It permeates every aspect of your life. You can't escape it. In fact, what you're doing is you're projecting this present pain into your every tomorrow to come. And I know that because I've experienced it. As it turns out, I'm living this life on the same journey as you guys are. I have children. I have health issues. I have people I love. I have the same stuff you do. And I know that in these issues, when it happens, you can't conceive when somebody passes. when somebody is so far away, a loved one or a child, you just can't conceive of a day when things will be better. You project today's pain into tomorrow and every tomorrow that is to come, and it's debilitating. So you call people like me. Now, what I tell people when I meet with them, and I've shared this with many of you guys, and I've said it from up here, I tell people that these emotions that you feel, they have a powerful purpose. In fact, emotions, there's great gift if we use them as intended, that we use them as they're intended. Emotions are actually a gift because they're a source of information. If you're angry, if you're hurt, if you're depressed, all these things, if you're fearful, they're a source of information that what? That something is wrong. That something is not as it should be. Things aren't as you want them to be in a way that is deep and meaningful. In fact, it's meaningless in that minute, and you have these emotions that say something is very wrong. It's telling you, and I would say, to pull back the curtain, it's telling you often, in fact, most often, that there's this issue to be addressed. This issue that you have to deal with, whether it's your issue or an issue in your household or an issue with somebody that you love peripherally that's become your issue and you need to deal with this issue. That's information that's passed along by emotion. And when used that way, emotions are of tremendous value, are they not? They're amazing. And so I would tell people, just as an aside that's not here, don't run from emotions. Listen to what they're trying to tell you as a source of information. But tragically, that's not the way we use our emotions. We instead use them as a source of advice with tragic results. We use our emotions as a source of advice. What does that look like? Let's just go with depression, because whether you've been depressed organically because your head isn't, your body's not manufacturing a chemical the same way that diabetics have the same issue, a chemical, whether it's organic or whether it's just a symptom of your situation, we've all suffered through depression. What does depression tell us to do? Depression tells us to go back to bed, doesn't it? Depression's advice is go back to bed. Now, can we all understand as I say this? Are there times you probably need to go back to bed? But that's not what we're talking about, is it? To go back to bed, to pull the blinds, to sit in the dark alone, to stay isolated with the shades drawn from the world. It tells us emotions often that relief would be found in death. That's the advice. And emotion tells us that death would be the relief I crave, the release I need. Anger tells us to strike back, to defend myself at all costs. My value has been accosted. I must strike back, whether it's verbally, whether it's literally with my fist. I must strike back, anger tells me. That's advice I get. Loneliness tells us to find a warm body, even if it's on a screen. Tells us to pursue that, promising momentary acceptance, a respite from this crushing weight that something is not right, which is great information. But emotions give horrible advice. Emotions, they tell us to find a bottle. They tell us to find a pill, to crush, again, drown this crushing feeling that something's not right. That I need to address an issue that perhaps I don't have the skills to. That's the stuff I'm called to deal with. Not your finances, not your pornography addiction, not your alcoholism, not your child's death, but the emotions that come with them that drive them and feel as if they're a trap. That's the stuff. That's the stuff, because what's the purpose of emotions? To convey information. And I've said this before, but I know it must be important again today because I put stars by it. So here we go. Emotions are wonderful sources of information, horrible sources of advice. Doesn't Scripture tell us? What is your heart? What is your heart? It's deceitful. It's a liar. Your emotions give a horrible advice. If you get nothing else today, and you're a parent here, you're struggling with an issue yourself, remember this. Emotions are wonderful sources of information, horrible sources of advice. If you're dealing with something, that's a wonderful thing, but we'll keep moving past it. And I believe that as we go through this first book of Peter, this series of books, the next one, let's see if you guys are smart and following along. Peter wrote 2. We're currently in 1 Peter. What do you think we're going to do next? Oh, that would make more sense. Yeah, let's do that one instead. Yeah, sure. 2 Peter, and he wrote this thing, and I believe that Peter knew what we just said also. I believe Peter knew that emotions are wonderful sources of information, but horrible sources of advice. I know he must have. He's definitely smarter than me, and I believe he had to know these things. So he's writing from Rome. Here's the background, as we say every week. He's writing from Rome just months before this great fire was going to destroy 70% of the infrastructure of Rome, leaving 50% of its citizens displaced. And it was going to spark great persecution. Did you not hear my pun? Wow. This fire was going to spark great persecution. Thank you. I worked on that. Great persecution amongst the body. And in fact, the approaching storm, living in the shadow of the storm, that's what we're saying. That long before the storm hits, I can remember being at the Gulf of Mexico one time, and we're watching on the television the storm that is actually happening out there approaching. And the wind was hitting, and the storm is approaching with raindrops. It is already present, and it's showing it's going to get worse. And Peter and these people, as he's writing this, these storms and the winds have been hitting for a while. Persecution has begun in such a way that when the fire does hit and the Emperor Nero wants to find a scapegoat for it, he's going to blame this Christian community, and thousands of them are going to die in the way that we typically think of the persecution. Not in the amphitheater, that's later. It's not quite built yet, the Roman Colosseum, but in horrible ways. And so Peter, man, he's knowing this, and he's preparing the church. I want you guys, and we say this every week because I think it's important this week as it was last week, and tomorrow as it will be forever. When you read the scripture, understand this is a letter in a historical context written by a real man who had really known Jesus Christ, who had really understood this stuff, and he is giving his heart to them and sharing it with us now 2,000 years later. It's not just a verse to be lifted and used as a hammer to make a point. This thing is living and breathing, and he's living and breathing as he wrote it to living and breathing people who are in a historical context. He's preparing the church for what's coming, and he's sharing his thoughts. He's sharing what he had learned as he traveled for 3 years with Jesus, and he tells them that they must love each other. We're going to do some background and get today. As Jesus loved them, having Jesus' heart for people, because as we said, and it may be one you can pull up, Jose, again, and then I'll probably skip a bunch, because following Jesus Christ will always take you into the path of people. Yeah, it is. Always. It'll always take you in the path of people. You cannot extricate the two, one from the other. He said he'd taken 640 some laws, and they said, what is the most important law? And Jesus said, love God. He says, if you're doing this, if you have this relationship that you're pursuing, it will naturally extend to what he said next, to love people. Pursuing this will always take you in the path of people. And then later he goes, I'm going to take both of those down to one. Love one another as I have loved you. And then he went and died for us. So it's a big deal what he's saying. Following Jesus will always take you in the path of people is the background of what Peter's writing. But your tendency, and this is big, let's all be honest, we've said this. We may not always be right. I may not always. In fact, those of you who like to tell me when I call a wrong football play, I'm sure you'll be willing to tell me when I get a verse wrong, which is probably more important. We may not always be right in here, but can we at least always be honest? We may not get everything right, but I can promise you it's not because I'm trying to do a song and dance. And I can tell you that our tendency, yours and mine, when we go through troubling times is to withdraw into ourselves, is it not? When things go crazy, our tendency isn't to go, you know what, I feel like going out amongst people. When my world is turned upside down, I think I want to go and hang out. No, our tendency is to withdraw. Our tendency is to actually become isolated. Our tendency when we go through troubled times is to withdraw into our fear, into our isolation, into our confusion. You can take that one off, Joseph. Justin would have had it down by now. Justin's homesick. I told him, come on in. Nobody minds if you come in throwing up. All right. We withdraw. We turn around and we turn inward as opposed to outward. And we need to make no mistake about it. Peter is writing to a group of people who are going through very, very troubling times. They were fearful of an unknown future. They were confused. Remember, we said we'll say it in 2 Peter. Peter, he had to tell them, listen. Jesus is not slow. God is not slow in returning, as some count slowness. He's not slow in keeping his promises. He's patient, wishing that none would perish, but that all would have salvation. And I said, I believe the reason he had to write that was when Jesus left, those he had left behind, he goes, I'm coming back. They thought he was coming back very, very soon. And he'd been telling people, I'm sure, hey, Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. And now people are saying to him, he's not coming back before I go into that. This is going to be horrible. They are confused about an unknown future, just in many ways, as you and I, if we're being honest, we watch the news, we see what's happening, we're very confused, and we're fearful. And the tendency for the church is, as many of us have seen, is to retreat into some holy huddle, right? To go back amongst ourselves, or worse than that, as we'll say in a minute, to withdraw from the church in our fear. So he tells them this. Peter tells them, don't listen to the advice which your emotions are giving you to withdraw. He tells them instead, above all, stay passionate. Keep fervent, which means passionately prioritize loving each other. You have to prioritize it. It has to be a passion of yours. You have to fight this urge to withdraw with a fervent love, passionately prioritizing loving each other, loving people, as we talked about last week, loving people as they are, where they are, without any condition, accepting their value, not as a grumbling, not to say, well, I would love, and I use Glenn because we're buddies, I would love Glenn if he would just stop. You can't do that. And isn't it odd? Have you guys not experienced this? When the world is turned upside down, people irritate you even more. When life is going hard, when the world isn't treating you the way you think it should, when the future is confusing, people's words that would normally pass by you, they hit you and they irritate you and you begin to grumble about them. They stick with you. I don't know what they meant about that. That's crazy how they said that. I can't believe. In fact, if you and your wife, there was times in my life and my wife when we were married, we would tell you this. We could not stand each other. And the only thing we could get us by was talking about some of you guys. It would take, I'm being honest, it would take the heat off of what we knew was this wall that seemed inescapable between us. So we would cause these conversations to occur. Oh, can you believe what Jody did again? I don't remember what it was, but I'm sure you came up, right? And those of you who've been married for as long as I have, or a certain period of time, you will realize that's kind of marriage. These walls that come up that you can't seem to get over. And so we begin to grumble about people. But in the spiritual sense, he says when you grumble about someone, it is putting a condition upon your acceptance of them. It is saying, I know I should see your value as God did, as Jesus did. I know I should see your worth as Jesus does. But man, until you do this, I won't do it. Now, just as a parenthetical thing, I was thinking about, somebody asked me, love covers a multitude of sin. It doesn't cover up sin. And one of the things we are called to do is not to grumble about somebody's stuff, but to recognize their brokenness and often intervene in their brokenness. Grumbling and recognizing simply have a different heart behind it, do they not? So I'll just move past that. Loving people as they are, he said. This is how we're supposed to be passionate. He says in this stuff, in this fear to withdraw in these hard times, passionately prioritize loving each other. He says focus upon not their brokenness as a condition of your acceptance, but as a path in to their life, into relationship with them. This is what he says, and he continues. He says, because conditional acceptance isn't really about them at all, is it? Conditional acceptance isn't about them at all. It's actually about you. It's about me, and I just said it was. When some of you guys, right? Not for nothing, but who died and made you king, right? Whatever, move past that. We'll edit it out. When some of you guys irritated me the most was when I was struggling the most. And I just focused on you. I can tell you that the happier I am, and I mean happy, and I shouldn't say the more joyful I am, the more valued I feel in my relationship with Christ, the less I grumble about you guys. Because I like myself. I know who I am, and I know we're all broken. So when I grumble, and again, not recognizing your brokenness as a way in, but really as a reason not to accept you, it says more about me than you, because our natural default is to be, and this is going to shock some of you who haven't heard this, that We speak truth in here, and this is going to be something I bet is radical. Our natural default is to be selfish. Glenn, I'm telling you, my little baby Dallas, we've said we've agreed, I think we took a vote, it was scientific. We've agreed that the two cutest babies in the world currently right now, I believe, are Dallas and Pete. I forget the other. What's the other one? Was it Holland? And you guys, one thing we've learned in the past couple months is you can't argue science. So those are the two cutest babies. And you know what Dallas's first word is going to probably be? No or mine. Right? Followed quickly. These little precious things, as soon as they can talk, we're like, you're not so cute. Right? Mine. You and I, our default is to be selfish. And have you discovered it's even more so when things aren't going your way? When things aren't going your way. When you don't have enough, I'll just be honest with you. I forgot to charge my light. So I'm going to probably ad-lib a lot of things. And before you guys think, did Don hit the vodka lemonade out there before he came in here? No, I'm just having a hard time reading. The vodka lemonade is on the table for next week. Here we go. Our natural default is to be selfish. Even more so when things aren't going our way. We begin to focus, this is where I was at, we begin to focus on us, what I want, what people aren't doing for me. Is that just my experience? That when things aren't going my way and this hasn't happened the way I thought it would, and when this person has abused me, has hurt me, I begin to think more and more about, you know what, I don't deserve that. In fact, you know what I do deserve? I deserve to be treated much more better like. That's a word. And if you give me enough time, and this may surprise some of you, I have, and I'll be honest with you up here, I have no shortage of reasons to be offended, to be bothered, to be irritated by some of you guys. Do I not? And some of you have made a list of why you would never attend this church in the past because of Don Knight. Some of you are shocked you're here. Because if we are honest with each other, we bump into each other enough in this life that really, do we not give each other enough room to grumble if we wanted it? 100% we do. We absolutely do it. And Peter says this, and I'm talking about you guys, us in the church. Peter says, don't do it. He says, don't do it. He tells them, he tells us, he says, in these final days, okay, final days. You weren't here for it, so let me just say this. The final days have been bookended from the time Jesus went back to the Father and when he returns at some point. We're all in the final days. And Peter says, in these final days, you must draw even closer than ever. Why? Because you're a body. You're a body, and a member of the body cannot survive cut off from the body. See, we don't say this enough. We act as if, I hear my friends say things like, well, I don't go to church, I go to the woods, I go fishing. I say, so you go enjoy all the gifts God has given you, but you don't come in and worship the giver of the gifts by being a part of his body. And I'm going to make a point later. We cannot represent Christ accurately if members of the body are missing. We give a perverted, a warped version, a disproportionate version if an arm is gone. And I'll go back, I'll say this entire thing at the end, but we got to get this. We are a body, and every member of the body cannot live cut off from the rest. So look at verse 10. 1 Peter 4:10. As each one of us has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another, passionately in these troubled times, serving one another. Employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. You see, every member of this body has a unique gift. You have a vital role within this body. Within the church at large, the body of Christ, and I would tell you, if God's called you in here and you're a believer, you've received grace, that you understand that the Holy Spirit now, he moves within you. You have a vital role to play within the body. But what's often misused in this verse, what's missed in this verse, is people focus upon their gifts. I've been part of churches that we spend all of our time for months and months and months saying, well, you know what my gift is. We treat our spiritual gifts like our enneagrams, don't we? Like our love languages. And we focus on them and we're like, well, this is... In fact, I grew up in the 80s, and I talked about it, And I'll just say there was a Pentecostal movement that actually elevated some spiritual gifts so much higher than the other that people who didn't experience being slain in the Spirit were actually a member of the JV group. Do you guys remember that? Some of you older people? The pressure to actually have a gift, and we'll talk about it later. Well, I can remember my Pentecostal buddy, we're somewhere, and he's trying to teach me how to speak in tongues. He said, say Jehovah Jireh, faster and faster and faster, and pretty soon, you too could be a member of the varsity crew. But we still do it. We elevate gifts. We talk about, I have this talent, I have this gift, I do all this. And then they say things to me, I should preach more on this gift, or I should preach more on that gift. And I've told you, when will we preach on gifts? I'm going through the Bible. When it shows up, and when we talk, we'll also, I'm teaching on gifts today. I'm saying each one of us have been given a unique and vital gift, a unique and vital role to employ within the church. But what's often missed is we argue, we talk about, we focus on our gift, even supposing, and Paul had to address this, that one spiritual gift is better, and we want to deserve that one, Jehovah Jireh. Still no, right? Even desiring that one, or being irritated that a pastor doesn't preach on it, is this. We neglect that we've all in the body received the greatest possible gift of all, which is God's grace. In fact, we are called ultimately, he said, put it back up again, Joseph, verse 10. He said, we are called to be, gives us a title. What are we, guys? We are good stewards of grace. You and I are stewards of grace. You and I can talk all we want. We probably will when we get there about spiritual gifts. And some of you will be like, hey, Don, I didn't like it when you said that about tongues. And I didn't like when you said about healing. And I'm like, well, I didn't say that like when you said that about whatever, right? We'll have these conversations about it. But the one thing I won't even have a conversation with you about, so don't even try, is that the number one thing we've been called to do is be stewards of grace, which is the greatest gift we've ever been given. So I will disinvite you. If when that time comes, you want to tell me that we should be doing more of this or more of that, I will always come back and say we should be doing more always of extending grace in every way, in every gift you have been given. If you have not used it for that purpose, get out. So you might not want to send me that email because that's the conversation. We're called ultimately to use our gifts in that pursuit of grace. You see, growing up in the church, I'll ask you the same thing to prove my point. Always, when we heard stewardship, it was used talking about money. Say it again for the people in the back. Say it with your chest, right? You don't get that. You get it, right? It was always, stewardship was being talked about what? About, here's what I was told, money or the church. We don't do this in the church. Things like this. It was exclusively referring to money or physical resources. Don't eat in the sanctuary. You'll get dirt on something. Don't stain the carpet. Get your feet off the furniture. You're not being a good steward of these things. But Peter says that we are to use all of our blessings, all of our gifts, not to make sure the furniture stays clean or the church building stays great, but as stewards of grace. If you want to know what your title is as you leave here today, I put it, it's stewards of grace. That's who you are. That's who I am. We are stewards of grace. I was in Mexico. We're at this church that we're dealing with, and the kids are in there. All the kids from the little village are in there, and they have this beach ball, and my kids are playing with the beach ball, and they're bouncing the beach ball, and the beach ball would hit, and it'd fly up and hit the ceiling fan in the church, and I began to panic because, right, Mother? You don't even run fast. You don't even walk fast. So I went to Andy, who's the pastor of the church. I was like, dude, I'll get him to stop. I'm afraid something's get broken. I'm projecting. And he stops me and he goes, and I won't try to do the Spanish accent. It would sound more than vaguely racist, right? I said, hey, Andy, I'll get him to stop. And he goes, Don, stop. He goes, no, listen, the way I look at it is all of this was gifted for a purpose. And this is what he said. He goes, and one day the Antichrist is coming. I don't want him to get a good-looking building. And I thought, so you're saying we should use everything to pursue Christ? Everything as stewards of grace? It changed my mind. In that moment, everything I'd realized that was so winsome about Andy became, I want to be Andy. I mean that. That pastor, I want to live my faith as Andy does. We're downtown, and he says to me, now I'm way off base, so I'll have to come back, and there's no light, so give me grace at that point. We're downtown, and downtown Ensenada, because that's the village. It wasn't that rough, right? So we're downtown Ensenada, and he comes up and he goes, hey, I see that couple over there, and she came up and she asked, it's her and her son, she needs some money. Could you, and he gave me his credit card, and he goes, can you just go make sure that they have some, he goes, no, make sure it's food and some stuff, but if the boy wants some toys and candy, make sure he gets that. And like, wait a minute, the pastor just walked up, we didn't have a board meeting, we didn't have to come up and talk about the politicalization of poverty, we'd have to start talking about the generational effects of handouts. You simply saw a need and you said, let's go take care of that right now in real time. You focused on widows and orphans. You're crazy, Andy. You and your Mexican religion. More than vaguely racist, didn't it? And in that moment, I thought, that's who I want to be. Just taking care of needs, being stewards of grace. Now, those of you that are so uptight, of course I'll say it. Do we have to consider other things when we're getting stewards of money? Buzzkills. Yes, but this is not what we are called to be. We are called to be stewards of grace. That's our title. Back to the point. You know, a steward in the ancient world was someone who watched over something the master put them in charge of. The master would go away, or even in daily stuff, he goes, you're in charge of this. You are in charge of this thing, his money, his belongings. But Peter says we are stewards in the very same way of grace, meaning that those of us who have received God's grace are called to use it as God intended, which is to extend it. If you've received it, you cannot keep it to yourself. You must extend grace. You must. In fact, Matthew talks about it. He gave a whole parable, and you thought he was talking about money. In Matthew, we won't go there, but I believe it's Matthew 25, and I have it written down. Matthew, he tells this story about a master who's going on a journey. You guys familiar with this, some of you? And he gives 3 of his servants money to watch over a certain amount. Forget about all the amounts or this, but I will tell you this. He goes away, and when he comes back, and he asks them, hey, what'd you do with that money? Do you recall which one he actually praised? The one who took the amount of money he did, and he grew it. He was a good steward of it. He used what the master had given him in charge of, and he grew it. Do you remember the one who actually received horrible punishment? Yeah, not that he lost it. Isn't that crazy? Didn't lose it, didn't lose the money. What he did was he did nothing with the money. And the master goes, man, you could have done anything with that, but because you just kept it to yourself. And then he described horrible punishment. Didn't even lose it. This is insane. It's crazy, and it should get us aware. 3 stewards, 3 people entrusted with a great possession from their master. And I can tell you this, that if you think stewardship is about money, money is the cheapest thing we have in here. When I get called to people's house, when I get called in the middle of an emergency, in the middle of a crisis, when they say to me, I need help, sometimes they ask for money. In fact, I have a neighbor who went through the Weyerhaeuser strike, and at the end of this thing, I went and asked. He's got kids all in the neighborhood. I said, how you doing? He says, man, and he's a believer. He goes, the body's been amazing. I said, well, do you need help with money? He goes, I do. At the end of this, I'm going to ask you guys, put some money out there, and whatever comes in out there today, other than your normal tithe, right, that we're going to go ahead, if you have margins, I'm going to give it to my neighbor to make sure that coming out of this thing, that he's taken care of. And you're like, why would you do that, Don? I don't believe in unions. I believe in being a neighbor and loving my neighbor. I don't know where I heard that from. But money is the cheapest thing we've been given. It says, and I'm so far off this, I'll try to find it. It says that our God has 1,000 cattle and 1,000 hills. He doesn't need your money. He could make the entire moon into coins of gold. What he wants to know is, what are you doing with the blessings he's given you to extend it? What? Grace. He says, Peter says, that you and those of us, you and I, those of us in the body who have been entrusted with something infinitely more precious than money, or possessions. Those of us who have received God's grace have become stewards of God's grace, which means we must use it as the master intended, which is to extend it, to grow it. That's the point of Matthew. Not to make more money, although guess what? Some of you have been gifted with the ability to create wealth and then use it to do what? Extend grace. I'm not against money. I appreciate, I've said in here in the past, this past month, we received 13,000 and some change in tithes in this little body. And I think that's awesome. And 3, the majority of all of that, and I'm just being honest, it comes from 3 different families. And I tell them, thank you so much. And the rest of it comes in as you guys are moved to do it. We couldn't do all of this if we didn't have money to pay for it. You guys get that, right? And yet I'm not asking for your money. We're going to use everything you give us to extend grace so that people can come in and feel God's presence. You guys are committed to stewardship in all areas, those of you who do these things. Those of us who have received this must extend it because that's how it was intended. Do you realize that's the only way grace can possibly grow? That the interest we get from grace isn't like money in a bank. The interest we get in grace is we invest it in what? Each other. In the body, in needs, in love. We invest it in people. And that's how grace grows. It's the only one. And here's my thought. You said you're just getting to it? Well, I skipped a lot. Do you know that everyone has gifts? You guys realize everyone has gifts, right? Everybody has gifts. Everybody. Unbelievers, believers. The Bible says God causes the rain to fall upon the righteous and the unrighteous alike. He has gifted people, has he not? He's gifted them all in hopes that one day they come to what? The body and use them in this service. But there are people far away from Christ who have beautiful gifts. Gifts that aren't, and this is where we would talk about later, spiritual gifts versus talents and gifts, whatever. But we would agree, right? They have these amazing gifts. Everyone, did you know, and I want to, yes, call and response for those of you who've been waiting for the tent revival to break out. I got the snakes in the back pretty soon, right? Here we go. Some of you don't get that. Some of you do. It's really weird. Call and response time. Has everyone been given gifts? The answer is, has everyone in this world accepted God's grace? No. You see, we've all been given gifts, but not everyone has received God's grace. And those of us who have not experienced, those people who have not experienced the grace of God, who have refused his invitation, do you know what they do with their gifts? They worship them. They worship their gifts. They worship them. They pursue them. They think that this thing they have, their abs, their body, their ability to catch a ball, the fact that their face is mathematically symmetrical. Crazy. The fact that they have some cash, the fact that they can do this or whatever. They worship them and pursue them. It's nuts. They worship things, ignoring the creator of these things in so many ways. In fact, this is the essence of sin. This is the essence of sin. So many of you want me to, you ask me questions. Well, isn't that sin, what they're doing? I'm like, man, the essence of sin is this. Ignoring the creator and worshiping the creation. Is that not the beginning of the fall? The Apostle Paul, writing in what we call the book of Romans, he said that people have exchanged the glory of God for images. Idolatry, worshiping images, and you and I, we should be at least honest enough to say, our favorite image to worship is whose? Our own. I'm my favorite image. Even if I hate it, because I hate my image, I sure spend, and so do you, then a lot of time looking at it. Obsessed with it, making sure that the dots and the spots are somehow taken care of or whatever. We worship our agendas. We worship our preferences. We pursue them. We passionately prioritize our preferences. We fervently love ourselves. And can I share what I have learned as we're wrapping this thing up? I can tell you what I've learned, even as someone that has received God's grace, that has tasted it, that has become addicted to it. And yet even those of us who have received it and have claimed it and have settled our lives upon it, I can tell you this. When things go wrong, when people slander me, when people treat me unjustly, when people have hurt me, I also have these emotions. And I need to tell you this. Do you know in my life the people who have hurt me the deepest? The church. The church has wounded me. I have on multiple occasions found myself basically, and one time very much so, homeless because an organization I'd given my life to, I thought, well, they just said, get on the street. I've been hurt more. I've been slandered by people making phone calls over something I said. I will tell you, right now, If you're religious, raise your hand if you heard something today that, for me, that you could be offended by. Every one of you better raise your hand. I said so many offensive things today. If you choose to be offended by them as some religious types, and I have been hurt in that fashion. Randy, you ever felt it? You ever felt church people come after you? You ever had them make sure you got to fit their thing? I have been wounded more deeply by members of my family body, by church members, than anybody outside the church has ever hurt me. Ever. How many of you could say the same if we were being honest? How many of you have been hurt? I'm going to ask this. How many of you out there, and just say, yeah, me, or yes. How many of you could say you've been hurt by Christians in here? Okay. And you know what my tendency is? When things go wrong, I've been building for this, to put us on the spot, to pin us all to the target here. When things go wrong, when people slander me, when people treat me unjustly, when the people hurt me, well, my emotions have always told me to isolate from them. Haven't they told you the same thing? To turn inward, to focus on me, to begin to focus all my energy on what I deserve, what they did wrong to who? To who? To me? And then begin to think, you know what I've done for you guys? I've showed up at your house when your kid was high. I've showed up at your house and wrestled a 6'3", 240-pound, 17-year-old drunk man-child in the gravel on the side of Rowell Hill. I know because I still have some of the scars on my elbows. You know what I've done for you? I've given up time in the middle of my night, and I've went to your house and cleaned up the splatter from the suicide of your father, and you have now turned on me. And every good thing I've done in my life becomes not about pursuing grace, but about what? Me. See, emotions are wonderful sources of information. It's a horrible thing when the body cannibalizes itself, is it not? For us to turn and begin to eat each other would make no more sense than for me to put my finger in my mouth and start chewing on it until it is dead and gone. We are a body. Information is wonderful. Things were wrong in those times. Information was wonderful. The emotion device was horrible. To leave you guys, to leave the body, to turn inward. And in those moments, what I did was I exchanged the glory of God with thoughts of myself, did I not? My face, my desires, my image filled my thoughts. So you know what I did? You know what I wanted to do? And there were seasons I did it. I withheld my gifts from the body. Is that not what we do when we isolate? Is that not, Pete, is that not what we do? When we remove ourselves from the body, and we've all been given gifts, unique gifts, we remove ourselves, we withhold our gifts from the body. And some of you are going, well, I don't know my spiritual gift. Think about your money. Think about your tithe. Think about your house. Think about your time. Think about everything you've been given. And what you've done when you say, I don't want to be a part of the body anymore, what you do is you ensure that every one of God's blessings that he gave you to pursue grace with, to extend it, you ensure that that blessing ceases in its arrival upon your hands when you leave the body withholding your gifts. My physical gifts, my spiritual gifts, my physical blessings, when we are hurt, my emotions tell us to withdraw from the body, which is why Peter reminded his readers and us who are going through very, very difficult times, and this is the whole point, so much it's on your, don't call it a bulletin, or we will cease having church. Your handout. If the essence of sin is self, which Paul said it is, then the antidote is what? Service. The antidote is service. You see, that's what we've been called to do. We've been called to serve each other. And we do so by using all of the various, that's going to be the manifold grace. We use all of the various gifts that we've been given by God to grow grace everywhere we go. We extend it because that's how it was intended. He gave it to us to grow grace. We are stewards of grace. If you think your spiritual gift of healing, of tongues, of prophecy, of hospitality, of teaching, whatever you think it is, if you think that gift is more important to focus upon than extending grace, you are not being a steward that you've been called to do. All of these gifts are in the pursuit of grace, to grow it, to extend it, because it is intended to be extended. It empowers us for a purpose. Look at verse 11 and then we're done. Whoever speaks, all of us. You see, you may think that's talking about the gift of teaching. It's not. Do you realize that all of us are preachers, but not all of us are teachers? To preach is to lay, the Greek word, to preach is to give witness to speak on. Every time you speak on anything, about anything, it is to do as one who is speaking the utterances of God. Whoever serves, we're all called to serve. Every one of us is to do it as one who is serving by the strength which God supplies. Not what I bring to the table, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. And this is the first time Peter says it, I believe. Amen. Man, he just gave you something. And here's what he is saying as I read it. Each one of us in the body, what's my time? I'll get you out 10:15 as I promised. As each one of us in the body use our gifts to serve one another. As each one of us come alongside and we go, man, in whatever way, we say, man, I'm the hand, and we begin to do it. The world sees the hand. The world sees the feet. The world begins to see God through Jesus Christ in us in his perfect proportions. Is that not exciting? This should be so amazing to you because so many of us have seen Jesus in the improper proportions. We've seen him represented by people who are not coming together as the body and glorifying Christ through the service of each other, using their gifts as they're intended. You guys wanted a message on spiritual gifts? Well, you're getting one. Each one of us, when we do it correctly, the world begins to see Jesus in its correct proportions, with legs that run to them, with feet that move, with hands that reach, arms that hold, eyes that see beyond their brokenness, and a heart that loves unconditionally, accepting them as they are, where they are, and not grumbling about their brokenness, but seeing their brokenness as an inroad. And I would tell you this, think about the sin that you see that you can't handle. You hate it, you don't like it, so much so that anybody who engages in it or participates in it, if you're to be honest, if they showed up here, it would make you uncomfortable. That's the ones I want in here. You guys get it? That's the ones we're called to extend grace to. We're called, whatever you can't stand and go, God, I know this about myself. Beautiful. Let's present Christ to them. That's the ones I want, because for the body to be accurately revealing Jesus Christ to the world, all parts of the body must be alive and active. I need you guys. This is not a church of Dawn. This is not First Church of Dawn. This is our place where we meet as the church. We need to be alive and active, and that's what we've all been called to do. You see, I've been called to clean this up, and I've been called to handle that mess. Every one of you have been called to do the exact same thing in a different form, perhaps. Do you understand that? Every one of us have been called out, as we say in here. We've been called out on the waters. All around us, there is a storm raging. And one of the best things Spencer once said, he goes, you know what I love about what we're doing? We, in here, he says, it doesn't feel like we're on the shore telling people, you better come back inside. The water's rough. He says, it feels like we are trying to go out and get them. And we talked about how the original Coast Guard, when they were formed on the East Coast, this idea, this militia of men, their motto, when they would see the wreckage, their motto was, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And they lived their lives that way. And you know what we're called to do? We are called to actually go out upon these waters in boats that are filled with, that are empowered with grace. In a world that is actually drowning, if the essence of sin is self, the world is drowning in selfishness, in idolatry. And each one of us at great peril need to be involved. Is that a hard thing to say? It needs to paralyze some part of your life. Something needs to be at risk, or you're not risking anything. We have to believe in this, that all of us have a purpose. We're all needed. In my little metaphor, to stretch it too far, the boat builder, man, we need you. The boat builder, the one who rows the oars with strength and passion. We need you. Those of us, those of you with strong grips, that you see somebody, you grab them, you yank them into your boat, your home, and you love on them, even at great cost to yourself. We need you, everyone. And here's why, and this is very important. Not only when we withdraw from the body because we've been hurt, not only do we misrepresent Christ to the world because it has some strangeness of proportion. When you yourself withdraw your gift, your blessings, the things God has given you in this mission of grace we've been called, when you withdraw from that, do you realize you think, I'm just leaving the church? I'm just leaving the body of Jesus Christ. I can tell you what you're really doing because I have done it. You are actually choosing to jump into the seas of selfishness themselves. Because your focus has become on who? On who? Us, myself. And so I can tell you that this is a point, Peter has said, this is our point for those of you who want to be a part of this, on how we view spiritual gifts. We do not elevate one gift over another, except for one, which is stewardship of grace. And Paul said, of all the gifts you can have, what is the greatest we can have? Love. We are called to love violently. Peter earlier had said, and imagine we said this, what if we were to fight for grace in here as violently as we fight for the rights this world tries to take from us? If we were to fight for grace, well, we do so with the weapons we've been given. And the weapons we've been given are gifts that when they come together form the very body of Jesus Christ. Against nothing can stand. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the body of Jesus Christ represented fully in front of me. If anyone in here has, like myself, been hurt by me or other members of the body, may they remember today that emotions that they feel are wonderful sources of information. We should never cannibalize ourselves, and yet we do. But they're horrible sources of advice. And to withdraw the gifts, to leave the body, is to die, because apart from that living vine, everything dies. And to withdraw our gifts because we've been hurt, because we've been somehow slandered, is to focus on ourselves and to jump into the very seas that we know we're called to move across, saving people, extending a hand. Thank you for the grace that this group of people extend to me for 40 minutes or so every Sunday. I need it. I love it. I'm addicted to it. May I find all kinds of ways to extend it. In Jesus' name, amen.